Okay, I was reminded this morning that it's been about 3 weeks since I did a prophecy update. As you know, we had the prophecy conference 2 weeks ago, and then we finished up 7 churches of Revelation on Sunday morning in those 2 hours. And then last Sunday I was in Sacramento speaking at a conference along with Doug Krieger and Doug Shear and some others called the Church at Ground Zero. One of the reasons we did that, I'll show you a little clip as to why that conference came about. So there's been quite a bit happened in the world since then. This morning, I'm just going to kind of get caught up on some of the stuff. I'm not going to get caught up on all of it by any stretch of the imagination. So today we're going to call this one Situation Abnormal. And you'll see this a little bit. Again, as a reminder, we talk a lot about the convergence of all the different prophetic events that seem to be happening right now, and that they all converge and meet at a point near at the second coming of Christ. And as they get closer together, things are going to accelerate, and things are going to get very turbulent. Google doesn't always work perfectly. This morning I wanted to look for snow in Buffalo. And so I Googled snow in Buffalo, and I didn't type it wrong. I got snow on Buffalo, or Buffalo in snow. So Google's not perfect, but it does a pretty good job. You know how you always make fun of those guys who don't clean the top of their car off? Well, so the pictures up there are just absolutely stunning. There was one kind of Weisenheimer, I guess you would call him, who decided that he would make the best of a bad situation. So he turned his back door into a fridge, and it keeps the beer really cold. So that's probably the most innovative one, but just amazing amount of snow up there. So we'll talk a little bit about the future. The first thing we're going to talk about is a thing called normalcy bias. The normalcy bias, according to Wikipedia, says this: it refers to a mental state people enter when facing a disaster. It causes people to underestimate both the possibility of a disaster occurring and its possible effects. This may result in situations where people fail to adequately prepare for a disaster, and on a larger scale, the failure of governments to include the populace in its disaster preparations. The assumption that is made in the case of the normalcy bias is that since a disaster never has occurred, then it never will occur. It can result in the inability of people to cope with a disaster once it occurs. People with the normalcy bias have difficulties reacting to something they have not experienced before. People also tend to interpret warnings in the most optimistic way possible, seizing on any ambiguities to infer a less serious situation. One example would be Katrina. Remember when Katrina was coming up the Gulf, they said that the levees could fail, there could be flooding in New Orleans if it breached the levees. And so what happened? A lot of people ignored that. It's not breaching the levees yet. We don't have anything to worry about. The wind is blowing hard, but it's still not breaching the levees. We still don't have anything to do with it. And what happened? A couple thousand people drowned and died in that storm that didn't have to, because they were subjected to the normalcy bias. I like this picture of this guy sticking his head in the sand. There's a biblical component to the normalcy bias. In Luke chapter 17, a passage we refer to quite a bit, Jesus is talking, and he said to his disciples, verse 22, "The days will come when you will long to see one of the days of the Son of Man, and you will not see it. They will say to you, look here, look there, look here. Do not go away and do not run after them. For just like the lightning, when it flashes out of one part of the sky, shines to the other part of the sky, so will the Son of Man be in his day. But first he must suffer many things and be rejected by this generation. And then he says this, and just as it happened in the days of Noah, so it will also be in the days of the Son of Man. They were eating, they were drinking, they were marrying, they were being given in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark and the flood came and destroyed them all. So everything is going along just like normal. They're eating, they're drinking. They've never had a flood before. The earth has never been destroyed before. There's never been a massive judgment of God poured out on humanity before. And so everybody is going along just like things were normal. It will be just like that in these days as we get closer. People will be stuck in their normality. Now, I will also say as a caveat that there is also some support in the Jewish literature that the marrying that was actually going on at the time of the flood was same-sex marriage. There are some Talmudic and Jewish rabbinical scholars that believe that that was actually what was going on. And that would make sense because that's going on now. And we also have the next passage in Luke 17 where it says it'll be just like the days of Lot. It'll be just like that in the end. And what happened, the same thing happened in Sodom and Gomorrah. People went along with their partying, with their carousing, with their drinking, with their same-sex relationships and that type of thing. And then judgment came immediately. It came in like a flood, so to speak. We also see this happening in different parts of society. Let me give you an example. There's always been a pretty good, well, I'm going to play you a little clip from The Economist about how the age pyramid has always worked. The distribution of ages, you know, how many are in the 0 to 4, 5 to 9, 10 to 14 age categories. And it's always been pretty much, for the history of humanity, it's been a pyramid. But now look what's happening. Look at this little video from The Economist.
The pyramid is a traditional way of visualizing and explaining the age structure of a society. If you draw a chart with each age group represented by a bar, and each bar ranged one above the other, youngest at the bottom, oldest at the top, and with sexes separated, you get a simple shape. In 1970, that shape was a pyramid, because the largest segment of the global population was the youngest, 0 to 5 years old, comprising 14% of the total, followed by the next youngest, 6 to 10, with 13%, and so on in regular increments until, above 85 years old, there were so few people that the shape vanished into a point. The pyramid was characteristic of human populations pretty much since the day organized societies emerged. With lifespans short and mortality high, children were always the most, and old people the least numerous group. A population chart of England in 1700 looks like a pyramid. But now look at the chart of the global population in 2015. It looks more like the dome of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. than something you find along the Nile. Young children are still the largest group, but now make up only 10% of the population, and those above them are almost as big, with 9.5. The angle of the slope changes most markedly only after the age of about 40. In 1970, the youngest had not only been the largest, but also the fastest growing section of the population. But between 1970 and 2015, the population aged 0 to 19 grew by only 42%, whereas the population aged 20 to 39 rose by 128%. This group added almost twice as many people to the overall numbers than the group aged below 20. There are also now over 50 million people above 85, so the dome of 2015 has a spike. In 1970 to 2015, the dominating influence upon the global population was the fertility rate. That's the number of children a woman can expect to bear during her lifetime. It fell dramatically over the period, meaning that the world shifted from having larger to smaller families. But in 2015 to 60, the biggest influence upon the population will be aging. Small families are already the norm. The fall in fertility is slowing down, and now everyone's living longer than their parents, dramatically so in developing countries. So, by 2060, the dome will have come and gone, And now the shape of the population looks more like a column, or perhaps an old-fashioned beehive. It's a little fatter near the bottom and curves in at the top. But up to the age of about 50, the generations are of almost equal size, and the shape has vertical sides. The size of the Earth's population is still rising, from 7.2 billion in 2015 to 9.5 billion in 2060. But, according to calculations by Emi Suzuki and Wolfgang Fengler of the World Bank, two-thirds of the extra 2.2 billion people will come from the older age groups, those aged 40 to 59 and between 60 and 79, not from the younger. The increase in the last oldest segment is especially marked. Between 2015 and 2060, the number of 60 to 79-year-olds will double to 850 million. That's more than 4 times the increase in the number of children and teenagers, which will rise by only 200 million, or 8%. The numbers of the oldest people of all, those above 85, will rise at the fastest rate, by 281% in 2015 to 60, but from a much lower base, so they do not add as many people to the total. For all of history, humans have lived in societies dominated, in numbers at least, by children. By 2060, children will be no more numerous than any other age group. The year 2015 is, roughly, the halfway point in this astounding transformation.
Well, that has huge implications for the way society's organized, run, how people are taxed, because healthcare, those sort of things, because we're an older congregation, and the list of people having procedures is pretty long each week, some weeks. And that's because we have things falling apart. They need replaced. You need a little maintenance, and so that has huge implications. But understand that that's something that has never happened in human history before. So I would add that as one more thing that should militate against a normalcy bias. Having too strong of a normalcy bias can be, as we said in the case of Katrina, fatal. Another place would be Nazi Germany, for example. In his book, Wealth, War, and Wisdom, Barton Biggs said this: by the end of 1935, 100,000 Jews had left Germany, but 450,000 still remained. Wealthy Jewish families kept thinking and hoping that the worst was over. And so here, by the time of Kristallnacht in 1938, there were still massive numbers of Jews in Germany, even though they had been seeing and hearing stories about the massacre of Jews, the arrest of Jews, the carting away of Jews to death to camps where people never came back. They had a normalcy bias, and they just refused to leave. This week, Rick Wiles on TruNews interviewed our friend Gary Kaw, and it was a fascinating interview about this. I'm going to play a fairly extended clip of this because I think Gary makes some very good points in that. So here's last Monday's TruNews with Rick Wiles and Gary Kaw.
Gary, good to have you back. And brother, you know what it's like, don't you, to pay a price, to walk away from everything, to tell the truth.
Yes, I do, and I think we can relate to each other on many different fronts because of that, because we've gone through that. I have to have a peace of mind when I go to sleep every night that I've done what the Lord has called me to do. That's the bottom line. And I think until people reach that point in their lives where obeying God is more important than fulfilling one's own desires and goals, until they get to that point, they're really not able to be used of God the way He wants to use them. And I'm certainly full of flaws, but I thank the Lord that I did make the right decision years ago when I left my job and said, Lord, here am I, use me. And I feel very unworthy. I think most people that do put it all on the line feel that way. I feel very humbled. But I believe, as you do, that the time is very, very, very short. And we need to continue to speak the truth as long as we can. I can't. I just think about this morning. I cannot remember a 10-day or 2-week period in my lifetime, and I'm in my mid-50s now, where so many major events worldwide, but especially in this country, have broken, in just a few days, 10 days to 2 weeks, and none of them being good for our freedoms and for the future of our country. It really seems as if everything is imploding and unraveling very quickly. And so people should not be so naive as to think that just because certain things have not yet happened in the United States that they cannot happen. And as you know, Rick, my mother and father grew up in Europe during World War II. My father fled from the Nazis and the communists in Croatia, losing everything that they had, that his family had, and became refugees. And my mother grew up under Hitler in Germany. And my grandfather, her father, put his life on the line, standing up against Hitler. And after the war, my parents got married, came to the U.S., and I grew up hearing about what they went through. And at that time, we all thought something like that will never happen in the United States. But I just want to share something. My mom is 86 years old now, almost 87. She had a couple of strokes about a year ago and was beginning to deal with Alzheimer's. But while she was still coherent and able to talk clearly and think clearly, just a couple of years ago, she said, I went through all of this once in my lifetime. I didn't think I'd have to go through it again. This is coming from an elderly person, and yet so many young people today either cannot see what is going on because they're so deceived, or they don't want to, because of what you mentioned at the outset of the program, the normalcy bias. I think people are really having a hard time dealing with the fact that the United States is no longer the United States that we knew, and things are changing at lightning speed, and they're not going to be the same again. So that's where we're at.
Gary, in 1934, it was the German Jews who suffered from a normalcy bias, and as Mr. Biggs said in his book, events moved much faster than they could imagine. In 2014, is it evangelical Christians in America who are suffering from a normalcy bias?
I would say so. I would say your conservative Christians and also many of your conservative Jews in this country. They're beginning to get it, but they're still in a denial mode. And I want to go outside of our country for a moment and share something that's been happening in Argentina that I just found out about recently. I have a friend who has a Jewish friend in Argentina. 2 years ago, he told him, you need to get out and go back to Israel if you can. You need to do so quick. And this friend of mine believed the Lord had impressed upon him that severe persecution was going to come to Argentina. Well, that Jewish man, he's a businessman, and he lived there his whole life and had it pretty good, and he didn't listen. Well, he just talked to my friend recently and said, man, I wish I would have done something while I can. He can now not move any of his assets out of the country, and the utility company in Argentina, one of the utility companies, so we're talking about a quasi-government organization. You know how sometimes you'll get something in the mail and it'll have a stamp on the top, like making it an official document type of thing? Well, people in Argentina recently, when they received their utility bills, they had a stamp on there that said, be a patriot, kill a Jew. I mean, if you can imagine that, that's the point where it's at. A lot of people don't realize it. Well, he's trapped there now, and he's trying to get out. So he's moving some of his resources a little bit at a time to Uruguay, and hopefully from there we'll be able to do it. But he's regretting now, 2 years later, what he could have done when he had the chance to do it. Similar situation in Venezuela, but it's much further along. We have a doctor friend who has their family members trapped in Venezuela. They literally cannot get out. They're not permitted to leave. If they tried to, they'd be taking their lives into their own hands. So this is going on, but it's not being reported by the media. And I believe America is going to be facing the same situation fairly soon. And I don't want to put a date on it, but it doesn't take a rocket scientist or someone super discerning spiritually to be able to see what's going on if they're the least bit open-minded and wanting to see reality.
You know, I talked to Gary about 6 weeks ago over in Indianapolis, Gary Andrick, and Gary's, moved out of the country for the most of his things are out of the country now. And he said the hardest thing for him as an American has been opening a foreign bank account, even with money, because our government has locked down because of the way they've gone after foreign banks. Foreign banks don't want to deal with Americans. So it's very difficult to go out of the country and open a foreign bank account. I know people in ministry, they have their money in American bank accounts and they can't get it transferred to foreign countries because the foreign countries don't want to deal with the issues with Americans. I was interviewed this week. Some of you remember Ken Hovind, the creation science speaker. Josh Peck has a radio show and asked me to take a look at some things. And Kent has been in prison now for about almost 8.5 years. He had a 10-year sentence. And what he did was he took money from his ministry, and they would take it down and deposit cash, or they would move cash around to pay bills for a dormitory that they were building for unwed mothers or something like that. Well, he was accused of structuring. It's a criminal thing. They do it in the civil side. They also do it on the criminal side. It used to be that if you deposited or withdrew more than $10,000, the bank had to make a report to the federal government. It was to shut down drug dealers, okay? It had a good purpose. But now, if you deposit less than $10,000 on a regular basis, the government will seize your assets and accuse you of structuring. And this is happening all over. For example, one lady had out in Iowa had a Mexican, this was on the front page of the New York Times a month ago. She had a Mexican restaurant, and her insurance policy said that if you're making a cash deposit, we will cover you up to $8,000 per deposit. So she figured, well, she would watch the till. It's a cash-only restaurant, no credit cards. And when it got close to the $8,000 limit, she would send people down to the bank to make a deposit. The government came in and said, you're structuring, you're trying to avoid the reporting requirement. Therefore, we are seizing your assets. And in order to get them back, you have to prove that you did not commit a crime. This is happening all over. There was another gentleman who was saving money for he didn't trust the banks. He was a war veteran from the Iraq War, saving money for his kids. He kept cash. And when he got enough cash, he took it down and deposited it. And the government came in and seized the cash in his account because the bank changed ownership. It became part of a bigger conglomerate, and they had tripwires in their computer system, and they noticed that he was depositing less than $10,000 cash on a regular basis. And so they seized the $65,000 that he had in the bank to pay for his daughter's college education. Now, he was able to settle with the government, but it still cost him about $23,000. And the government doesn't apologize for this. I think we're going to find more of what's going on. So Ken Hovind's in prison because of this type of thing. Here's a little bit more of the interview.
To see reality. But I would tell people, Rick, that they really need to seek the Lord and pursue Him in prayer. And I believe the Lord will reveal to their spirit what they are to do. And I do believe across the board, at the very least, they will have a sense of urgency, and the Lord will tell them the time is short. Of that I am certain.
Gary, there is a vile, vehement hatred of Christianity rising up in this country in a significant number of people. And if you don't see it, you are definitely living under a rock. Come over here to my place and read my email, because we receive the most putrid, vile, disgusting emails and letters you can imagine of what they want to do to me and to all Christians. And this is coming from people inside the United States of America. And Gary, I'm telling you, if this spirit ever gets cut loose to run free in this country, there's going to be carnage in this country. This is a murderous spirit that's in these people. And it is a raw hatred for Christianity. And I've read emails where they said, we can't wait until it's time to kill people like you.
Yeah. I think, Rick, they're waiting for the perfect moment to lunge forward. And, when you see everything shaping up, you could see how if God allowed it, because of the lack of repentance in our country, how things could unravel very quickly. You're looking at the Ferguson, Missouri situation. You're looking at Obama defying everything by issuing the executive order on immigration, even though he said some 20 times he couldn't do so. There's just a disregard for the law. You've got Muslims worshiping at the National Cathedral, turning their backs against the cross and facing Mecca on prayer rugs. They literally...
Well, I'll terminate it there because it goes on for another 10 minutes or so. But, all these things are sort of happening. All these things are sort of coming together at the same time. You hardly hear anything about this anymore, Ebola, right? But look, this is the front page of the New York Times the other day, and it says, despite aid push, Ebola is raging in Sierra Leone. Now, you don't hear anything about it anymore. We've moved on, and the one thing that seems very apparent to me, you can find this stuff out, but you've got to check alternative news sources. You cannot trust the mainstream media much anymore to give you other than what seems to fit some kind of an agenda. I know this sounds crazy. I know I sound like a wacko for saying it, but Ebola is raging, and it's raging in rural areas, not in the cities, but out in the wild, in the rural areas where it shouldn't be raging. And it's still going wild. But you don't hear anything about it. Do you know that in these countries, Sierra Leone, in West Africa, and the other countries where this outbreak has occurred, that half of the people that were employed when this Ebola outbreak started are now unemployed? Half of the people that were working in the workforce in these countries 4 months ago are now unemployed. That's a stunning statistic. Have you heard anybody talk about that? It's never talked about. So that's one of the characteristics of this age, is that it will appear that things are normal because that's what they're telling you. And we've talked about this too, about the apostasy in the church, that this time is what was one of the characteristics of this, and we talk about this: chew the meat and spit out the bones. So I have a couple of examples that I want to play for you of things said in the church. Now, I was going to do a segment here, I think I'll try to do it next week, about the emergent church, because there are, a couple of years ago, John Piper and John MacArthur and a bunch of other people came out and said, don't worry, the emergent church is dead. And that was very wishful thinking on their part, because it's not. It has permeated all parts of evangelicalism. Every single denomination is wrestling with the postmodern issues raised, or the influence of postmodernism, the questioning of Scripture, the getting away from what the true mission of the church is and what shepherds are supposed to do in the church. All of that is changing in every denomination across the board. Now, have I looked at every denomination? No, but I've looked at a bunch of them, and I can tell you that in every one of those, some very conservative, that you would be shocked if you knew all the stuff that was going on in those denominations and fellowships. I'm telling you, it's the emergent church is not dead. It has gone totally mainstream. And you need to be aware of it. And so you need to hold Mike and I and Steve Mitchell when he gets here, you need to hold us accountable that we don't get drawn into that decline, because it's everywhere. Now, we talked some about the Catholic Evangelical Alliance. That started back in February, January, February, when Tony Palmer and Kenneth Copeland said they were going to do this. They went to Rome, to the Vatican, and met with the Pope in June. There's plans to do big things in 2017, which is the 500th anniversary of the Reformation. It's the 50th anniversary of the reunification of Jerusalem, to show that the Reformation is over. That's what they're going to try to show. And so this week, and one of the things that Leadership Network and other organizations has promoted is good works. We've talked about that. They want to be missional. We want to go out. We want to set up clinics. We want to feed the homeless. We want to partner with other people who believe in God, Muslims, Mormons, Catholics, Christians, mainline Christians, fundamental Christians, evangelical Christians, to advance things that we hold in common. So this past week, about a week ago, in the Vatican, there you see Pope Francis. And who do you see sitting up here in the corner of the front row? Rick Warren. Rick Warren, N.T. Wright, Russell Moore from the Southern Baptist, and many other evangelical leaders went to Rome because they wanted to work with the Pope on protecting traditional marriage. Now, that's not something to be dismissed lightly. That's something that I think we would all share. Excuse me one second. Somebody forgot to shut down their email. Okay. So, but what I want you to do is I'm going to play a clip from Rick Warren. Okay? Now, how many of you were Catholic and got saved? Okay, look at all the hands around here. You got saved out of a false church, a false religion that didn't teach the true gospel. But now I want to listen and see, this is what happens when you have these dialogues and meetings. Listen to this. This is Rick Warren on Catholic News just the other day.
We have far more in common than what divides us. When you talk about Pentecostals, charismatics, evangelicals, fundamentalists, Catholics, Methodist, Baptist, Presbyterian, on and on and on. Well, they would all say, we believe in the Trinity, we believe in the Bible, we believe in the resurrection, we believe salvation is through Jesus Christ. These are the big issues. Sometimes Protestants think that Catholics worship Mary like she's another God, but that's not exactly Catholic doctrine.
When you bow down to an idol, it's an act of worship, okay? It violates one of the commandments, at least one.
There's the understanding, and people say, well, what are the saints all about? Why are you praying to the saints? And when you understand what they mean by what they're saying, there's a whole lot more commonality. Now, there's still real differences, no doubt about that. But the most important thing is, if you love Jesus, we're on the same team. The unity that I think we would see realistically is not a structural unity, but a unity of mission. And so when it comes to the family, we are co-workers in the field on this for the protection of what we call the sanctity of life, the sanctity of sex, and the sanctity of marriage. So there's a great commonality, and there's no division on any of those three. Many times people have been beaten down for taking a biblical stance. And they start to feel, well, maybe I'm out here all by yourself. No, you're not. The church is growing in Latin America. The church is growing in Asia. The church is growing in Africa. It's not growing in North America or Europe, but it is growing everywhere else. And so we kind of have this feeling that maybe we're not as influential, but we're far more influential than people realize.
Because influence is what's important, right? Now, does that, and this is why I play these clips, as painful as they can be. I want you to hear exactly what people are saying. Not what I'm quoting, but what they are actually saying. Does what that was said there help or hinder the true gospel of Jesus Christ? It hinders it tremendously. It eviscerates it. It's disappearing. Okay, now I hear these things about great revivals and stuff, and I pray that they're true, but I am not convinced yet if this is the kind of thing that they're hearing. You believe in Jesus, we're all in the same team. Which Jesus? Which Jesus? And they're uniting with Roman Catholicism. And look at what the Pope did this week. In Istanbul, there's near the waterfront there along the Bosporus, there are two magnificent buildings. There on the left, your left, is Hagia Sophia, which was for 1,000 years the largest church in Christendom. Here is the Blue Mosque, okay? In 1453, the Muslims took over Istanbul, and the Hagia Sophia was turned into a mosque. It remained a mosque up until the time of Ataturk in the 1920s, when it was turned into a museum, but there's tremendous pressure to turn it back into a mosque. And so this week, the Pope, the one who Rick Warren wants to unite with, went to the Blue Mosque in Istanbul. And he stood, as the BBC says, in silent adoration in the Blue Mosque. At the Blue Mosque, one of the greatest masterpieces of Ottoman architecture, the Pope turned east towards Mecca, clasped his hands, and paused for 2 minutes as the Grand Mufti of Istanbul, Rami Yaran, performed a Muslim prayer. Here's an NBC News report.
Tomorrow, the world will witness a major moment for Pope Francis. The leader of the Catholic Church is traveling to Turkey, where 98% of the population is Muslim, for what could prove to be one of the most diplomatically tricky visits since he became Pope. Our report tonight from NBC's chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel.
The Pope's itinerary may say he's visiting Istanbul, but for many Christians, this will always be Constantinople. For 1,000 years, Christians ruled this city, and from it, an empire called Byzantium. Its greatest church was the Hagia Sophia. Built in the 6th century, its name means holy wisdom. But Byzantium was ultimately conquered. Muslim armies arrived in 1453 and converted Hagia Sophia into a mosque. 5 centuries later, Hagia Sophia was changed again, turned into a museum, and today is one of Turkey's most popular tourist destinations. But Turkey is changing.
Hagia Sophia has become a symbol of the deep struggle between those who want Turkey to remain secular and others who want to revive its Islamic past. And for now, it's the Islamists who have the upper hand.
Ali Belyut wants to turn back the tide of history. He leads a movement to turn Hagia Sophia back into a mosque and plans to try and block the Pope from entering. Hagia Sophia is a mosque owned by Muslims, he says, and if we don't reclaim it, we will be punished by God. Already, Ali's supporters in the tens of thousands gather in front of Hagia Sophia to pray. The Islamists have a powerful ally, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. He's resisted calls to remake Hagia Sophia a mosque, but allows the prayers outside to go ahead.
Museum is the best choice because, it's a monumental work of the humanity.
a monument that embodies nearly 2 millennia of religious power struggles that have returned to the shores of the Bosphorus. Richard Engel, NBC News, Istanbul, or Old Constantinople.
Well, so there the Pope prayed. And now in our country this week, of course, we had the protests over the Ferguson decision. Pam and I listened to an interview on Hugh Hewitt the other night of a left-wing writer, Jonathan Alter. That was the ignorance that that man displayed about the grand jury system was absolutely stunning. Of course, Ferguson has been burning, businesses burned, riots. This is somebody walking on the American flag in Oakland, and these are troops, riot gear troops out to protect the public in Atlanta. So there were protests all over. Roads shut down, and now you're not hearing much about it. Again, another one of these things. One of the reasons that things are changing, and we know that President Obama gave his speech this past week on immigration, where he just said, my opinion, I don't care what the Constitution says, I'm going to do what I want to do anyway. And so he sort of set himself up as this dictator. They're having this, and the reason why this immigration thing is different, because it will change culture. There's no doubt about that. It will have a dramatic change on culture. One of the places where you can see that change most apparently is in London, in Great Britain, where many churches are now turned into mosques because of Muslim immigration. There are places that are essentially under Sharia law in London. This is a graphic from this morning's Daily Mail about the increase from 2000 for the last 10 years of immigration within England, Great Britain. And you'll see that, for example, they have the total number of immigrants, what percentage of the population they are, and the increase since 2004. And so what you'll see is they now constitute 12% of the population. That's significant because a lot of times they say once a group that's very strong and committed to its ideology gets to be 10%, it will almost become the dominant ideology in the culture. So 12% of the population, a 49% increase just since 2004. In London, for example, they now have almost 3 million immigrants, non-citizens, 36% of the population, and up 31% in the last 10 years. That has a huge impact on culture, people. What do you think it's going to do to our country? What do you think it's already done to our country? This is what it'll do. The Archbishop, senior Archbishop of the Church of England said, well, when Charles is coronated, let's read from the Quran. Now, why is that significant? What is one of the titles of the King of England? He's the head of the Church of England. And there's an interview out there, you can play it. I won't play it because I don't like him. And he's talking about, we need Hindus and Buddhists and Zoroastrians and everybody to come. So you see what happens is this underpinning of the truths of Christianity, and they get eviscerated. Now here's a thing on the other night, and I want you to tell me what's missing in this. This is about a pastor in Sacramento. One of the reasons we put the conference together was because of the outreach going on between him and Muslim clerics, Muslim imams in Sacramento. This was on NBC Nightly News just Friday night about Rick Cole from Capital City Christian in Sacramento.
Finally here tonight after a holiday that's all about being thankful for what we have, while it can also be about the excess of what we have. We get a reminder tonight about those much less fortunate. A California pastor decided to walk a mile in someone else's shoes, and what he discovered on the streets may have changed him forever. His story tonight from NBC's Harry Smith.
May that be our prayer today.
It all started as a kind of stunt. Pastor Rick Cole surprised his congregation this fall when he told them he was going to live on the streets. It was a way to bring attention to the homeless and in turn raise money for a citywide program in Sacramento that provides shelter and food for those who have little or nothing. Cole raised the money in a matter of days, but he felt compelled somehow to stay on the streets for 2 weeks.
I've walked past people that stay in some of the places of homelessness and really almost not even noticed them, not considered their plight and what's going on in their life.
Unrecognized by his new neighbors, the pastor spent his days looking for food and worrying about where he'd sleep at night. He didn't preach, he didn't proselytize, he just listened.
What's it like to be homeless?
I think I began to experience how people ignore others. I became the one ignored. People walked by me like I didn't exist.
Oh, yeah.
Which for Cole was a life-changing experience. Until then, Cole perhaps pitied the homeless, but he honestly lacked compassion for them.
It might be like, man, those people just need to get a job. They need to get themselves out of the hole they dug for themselves.
Holes he found that were filled with addiction and mental illness, bad breaks and bad decisions. Who was he not to help?
They matter to God, they matter to me. Now I'm trying to figure out why didn't they matter to me before.
The poor are blessed, the Bible says. Until he lived among them, Pastor Cole didn't know they would be a blessing to him. Harry Smith, NBC News, Sacramento.
And that is our broadcast for this post-Thanksgiving Friday night. Thank you for being here with us.
So
I'm Brian Williams. Please join us for Nightly News this weekend. Then, of course, we hope to see you right back here on Monday evening. In the meantime, please have a good...
So what was missing in that story? What did Pastor Cole not do? He didn't preach. He didn't proselytize. So did he do ultimately any good? This is the problem with, there's nothing wrong with helping the poor, but it's like our friends from Malawi said, don't send us all that stuff. Send us preachers of the gospel because we're dying. And what we need is to be saved. So it's a interesting thing. This is this influence of Islam. This is just sort of a update. This is a map of Sweden. You knew that, right? As soon as you. But those red areas are now. There are now 55 no-go zones in Sweden where the police will not go. Why? Because of the Islamic influence in those areas. It's not safe for the police. 55 in Sweden. Supposedly that great bastion of liberal democracy and that sort of thing. Does that tell you something? We have a problem. So that's what's coming. Well, let's just look at Jerusalem real quickly and some of the things that went on there. We know that Jerusalem, it's in Zechariah 12, it's prophesied that Jerusalem will be a cup of trembling for all peoples, a heavy stone for all the peoples. All who lift it will be severely injured, and all the nations of the earth will be gathered against it. This is a significant prophecy that in the end times, that last great beast empire, kingdom that's set up to oppose God and what God's trying to accomplish in the world, will come against Jerusalem. Okay. Oh, by the way, this is a sidebar comment. There are people out there now that are teaching that the final Babylon of prophecy is Jerusalem. I have major problems with that, especially because of verses like this. Why would the final kingdom gather against itself? There's also teachings that the Antichrist will be Jewish. I also have problems with that, but we'll have to talk about that down the road. Remember this from Richard Engel about 3 years ago during the Muslim uprising, 3.5 years
You're back
ago.
here in New York for a few days. The question I've seen most people ask you, where does this all end?
This whole movement in the Middle East, and I'm worried about it, because while people in the region deserve more rights and they want more rights and they're embracing more of the will of the Arab street, well, the will of the Arab street is also ferociously anti-Israel, against Israel. And there's many people who believe that if you empower the Arab street, and the Arab street wants to see a war or wants to see more justice for the Palestinians, that down the road, 3 to 5 years, this could lead to a major war with Israel. It could also force a negotiated settlement. But I think over time, this thing ends in Jerusalem.
Well, he was correct in that. That's what Scripture says. But look at what's just happened in Jerusalem. We had this attack on the synagogue. I don't think we had a chance to talk about this since I did an update recently. A couple Muslim men, Palestinians, went into a synagogue in Jerusalem, in West Jerusalem, the Jewish area that would even remain Jewish after any peace agreement that created a two-state solution, which is looking increasingly less likely. And they stabbed and hacked to death 4 Jewish rabbis, 3 from America, actually 3 with American passports and 1 with a British passport. And the battle over Jerusalem, they say in the headlines, gets even bloodier. There's also this little thing down here in the Haaretz, which is a left-wing paper, so when you read it, you need to understand that what they say is kind of feelings-based. It doesn't make a lot of sense. It's not rational. They have this title here, Diplomatic Pornography. What's that? What Netanyahu's office did was to show what had happened. He actually put out pictures of the inside of the synagogue in Jerusalem to show what had been done to people who were there just worshiping God. A Jewish newspaper in Jerusalem calls that diplomatic pornography. Because, well, we certainly can't do that. Naftali Bennett, who is the finance minister in Israel, very passionate person. By the way, we didn't mention it in February. I think it's the 16th. Jeremy Gimpel and maybe Ari Abramowitz, maybe both of them, from thelandofisrael.com. They have a very popular radio show in Jerusalem, Tuesday night in Jerusalem. They're going to be here. We're going to sponsor a night with them. We're still not exactly certain where the exact place that we're going to do it. But I think we are on that one, aren't we? Anyway, you'll see more information about that. And also don't forget about the teaching weekend with Jacob Prasch. But Naftali Bennett, finance minister of Israel, interviewed on CNN about what had happened in Jerusalem. And watch what happens. He's on the BBC.
The Minister of Economy in Israel is Naftali Bennett. He's in Jerusalem for us. Thanks for joining us. First of all, your reaction to this attack and any information you might have on it.
Well, this is a Jerusalem synagogue massacre. This morning at about 7 a.m. At a synagogue, 2 Arab Muslim terrorists came in and began stabbing and killing and shooting the worshippers. Unfortunately, we know that 4 Jews have been killed and there's about 4 or 5 others injured. This is a deliberate act of terror that was incited by Abu Mazen. Over the past few days, he's asked and encouraged the Palestinian people to create a day of rage in Jerusalem. This is what rage looks like.
Well, I don't know whether the Fatah leader would accept responsibility for what's happened here, because these are individuals who've taken action. We don't know exactly where they're from or why they've acted as they have. And you know, one member of Hamas I've just spoken to has cited, and others are citing, the death of a bus driver, which has also provoked a lot of anger there. And there has been a huge run-up, hasn't there? A spate of attacks and a lot of provocation around the mosque.
Gita, that bus driver committed suicide. It's already been known. And the fact that Abu Mazen himself incites and tells the Arabs, take arms, fight the Jews, you know, this individual came this morning to pray.
That picture. If you can take that down.
This individual came this morning to pray, just like many Muslims and many Jews went to pray this morning. The Muslims went home safe, but 4 Jews will never come home again.
You see, as soon as he put up the picture of what would happen in the synagogue, no, you have to take that down. They'll show Gaza pictures all day long, particularly on the BBC. But boy, you've really crossed the line when you show dead Jews. That's something that can't be accepted in good society anymore. Caroline Glick, in her article responding to the slaughter, said this: what we are seeing in Jerusalem today is not simply Palestinian terrorism, it is Islamic jihad. No one likes to admit it. The television reporters insist that this is the worst possible scenario because there is no way to placate it. There's no way to reason with it. So what else is new? The horrible truth is that all of the anti-Jewish slaughters perpetrated by our Arab neighbors have been motivated to greater or lesser degrees by Islamic Jew hatred. The only difference between the past 100 years and now is that today our appeasement-oriented elite is finding it harder to pretend the obvious fact that we cannot placate our enemies. Now Jerusalem, the government is receiving a lot of pushing back from Arab governments and other governments in Europe about building Jewish settlements in areas that they're going to give to the Jews anyway if there is a two-state solution. But how dare they build homes for Jews in Jerusalem? In our own country, you see these protests, Stop Funding Israel Terror in New York, and then the New York Metropolitan Opera has this hideous opera that's going on right now, sold out, The Death of Klinghoffer. Now, do you know who Klinghoffer is? The Kilia Laura ship was taken over by Palestinian terrorists, and this man who was crippled, near 80, in a wheelchair, was shot and killed and shoved over the side of the ship by Palestinian terrorists. And now there's an opera about it in New York. This is our country. I'm also going to show you some things here now about, and we'll finish with this as a few-minute long clip, just what's going on college campuses, particularly this BDS thing, this boycott, divest, and sanction Israel. Don't do anything, but here's just a brief video report on that.
Israel is a terrorist state!
I would have never said a year ago that this would happen on my campus. 30-something% Jews, proud Jews, Zionists, such strong Jewish and Israel community, pro-Israel communities, this would never happen. It happened. People were being, verbally, maliciously attacked for saying, I believe in the right to a state of Israel. The anti-Israel sentiment has only escalated. The campus is going to become more and more polarized.
Things have just gotten a lot crazier and more negative on campus.
The negativity and the loudness, the abrasiveness on campus make it difficult for me to be open about supporting Israel.
A lot of students feel harassed and uncomfortable in their own living situation.
I don't think it's acceptable criticism of Israel when Israel becomes villainized, when
Israel becomes the big bad devil.
You see these pamphlets that depict Jews with hooked noses and sucking children's blood, and I think that is classic anti-Semitism.
Students for Justice in Palestine hold an event called Israel Apartheid Week, where they lie about Israel for a week in a way that demonizes the state of Israel.
There's people who are pretending to be soldiers at checkpoints.
Filthy Arab, an Israeli life is worth more than all of you combined.
They were having a die-in, which is students lying, kind of pretending to be dead in the middle of campus. They're kind of trying to intimidate and frighten people on campus.
If we just look at the issues that people are focusing on, human rights issues in general, these are issues that are not even on par with the human rights violations that are happening in so many other places in the world.
The vote of 20 to 12 to 1 that passes.
Pro-Israel students who spoke at the Central Student Government vote faced threats from various groups.
All of these disparaging insults, accompanied by threats of violence, are messages that I and other members of Central Student Government have been receiving this past week.
Students were also called dirty Jews, things like this. Especially those on Central Student Government were called on the phone saying, "We know where you live, like vote with us or else."
To say that this is a non-violent, peaceful movement, I would seriously disagree, especially with the number of emails and harassing texts and harassing voicemails and harassing calls that have caused me to miss class for a week.
When there are times with high pressure, like during this divestment vote, students are definitely intimidated. A lot of the pro-Palestinian students were screaming and just very offensive towards the pro-Israel students who spoke at the meeting.
It's a little bit scary because I kind of never know how students will react to my pro-Israel sentiment. Even openly talking with other students on campus and professors especially.
So we can say this, and Hamas is a terrorist organization, sure. They also do great healthcare in kindergartens. But Hamas doesn't recognize Israel. So what?
You see it in Columbia, Saliba, Khalidi, Masad. They're all tenured professors, and they're all espousing their very anti-Israel and distorted views on the students.
As a student, the power dynamics are there. I feel powerless in a sense and very intimidated that these figures of authority and academic knowledge are basically invalidating everything I support.
They will stage a walkout, in some cases even curse at the speaker. They're notorious for doing this.
My only purpose today is that this event is shut down.
Johnny Garber speaks for Israeli apartheid. Johnny Garber speaks for Israeli apartheid. Genocide at the hands of the IDF.
It sounds like it was a very specific thing that happened nationally. They had their very specific script that they were reading from a piece of paper about how Noni Darwish supports Israeli apartheid. It's nationally organized. It's not something that students came up with at UNM.
They're not saying, let's have these borders. They're saying, let's have all of Israel gone. Israel has no right to exist.
From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free.
What it essentially means is that from the river, meaning the Jordan River, to the sea, meaning the Mediterranean Sea, Palestine will be free, meaning all of Israel, as it currently exists, will be dissolved, and in its place will be a Palestinian state.
Well, that's where that movement is going. So that's where we'll finish today. It's a unique opportunity for the church to reach out to the Jewish community and show support for the nation of Israel. And you need to know that that is within the evangelical church today. That idea is even called by some. Actually, I was reading an article yesterday, and I don't see it here in my notes. I was reading an article yesterday, I'll reference it next week if I remember, that the idea that God brought the Jewish people back and that the nation of Israel, current nation of Israel, might have prophetic significance in the end time scenario is, in this man's word, heresy. This is an evangelical scholar, And he says there are almost no scholars who believe this, that Israel is significant in God's prophetic plan. That man is a fool. And when you see people make appeals to authority, no one else believes this. No serious scholar believes this. But they don't give you any serious scholars who actually agree with him. They're overstating their case, and they look foolish. But this is what's going on. It's in the church. It's in campuses. It's around the world. It's what the Bible said would happen in the end times. And it's repeating the problems of the 30s in Europe are repeating themselves really right now on almost a worldwide scale. And so we need to pray for those people and everyone else. So let's pray, and we'll send you on your way. Father, thanks so much for your prophetic word, that we would know that it was in your plan to restore a nation of Israel, initially in unbelief in the end times. We, like Daniel, thank you so much for fulfilling your word, for being faithful to your word. Lord, we pray that you will help us to be witnesses to Jewish people in our community that we come into contact with, that we might show them the true light of the Messiah in an increasingly dark world. Bless us as we go this week. In Jesus' name, amen.
Música